You ready, guys? We're getting into the insight stage and beginning to look at skills for facilitating insight with clients. So let's begin. In helping, insight refers to a few things. One is a client seeing things from a new perspective. Next, it could involve a client making new connections that they hadn't really made before. And lastly, it could involve them having a deeper understanding of why things are the way that they are. So I think that those definitions kind of make sense, but those are kind of the different types of outcomes that people are generally looking for in counseling or helping. And it can be important to remember that the way that clients come to insights can be a little different. For some people, it can be just like an aha moment. All of a sudden there's all this awareness that they had never really had before. But a lot of times it actually takes time, and it's kind of a slow build or a slow burn. In the book, they talk about how some clients might find these nuggets of gold, while others might slowly get gold dust that eventually makes something shiny and valuable. And very importantly, stronger insights are both intellectually understood and emotionally felt, and we'll get into that in a minute. So here's an example of when you know that someone, where do I put me? When you know that someone really is kind of ready for the insight stage, because how do you know that to begin with? So let's look for clues of why this might be a good situation for the insight stage. So Roger and Mark, we'll call this Roger and this is Mark. They've been working together for several sessions. They've spent a lot of time discussing Mark's time in retirement. Mark has explored feeling bored and depressed in retirement. He's also kind of reminisced about the fulfillment he used to feel at his work, and he's shared about his recent tensions with his husband, David. So here we're seeing a really common scenario that older retirees experience of they used to be really excited and have a steady flow to their life. They were fulfilled by their work, but now they're retired and they just don't know what to do, and they don't feel that same kind of excitement, and it's starting to bleed into his home life with his husband. So the key part here is that Roger and Mark both feel that they've thoroughly explored these issues. And Mark feels that he's ready to start thinking about solutions and changes. So they've spent time in the exploration stage really mapping out the territory. Also, you'll notice they have a great deal of shared trust in their helping relationship. Roger feels really good about their helping relationship as the helper, and Mark feels really good about us, the client. I'll continue to say this, but what's so key is that when you move into the insight stage, you have to have that strong relationship, or you're probably not going to find the success that you're looking for. So this is why, and what we mean when we talk about insight needing to be intellectual as well as emotional. So in the book, they give an example of a woman who is maybe really angry with her boyfriend all the time, and she intellectually knows this isn't wise, it's not helping my relationship, but she doesn't understand some of the emotions behind why is that her habit. And so maybe an example for her is that her father was a bully to her, and she never really knew how to express that, so she's kind of kicking that forward. She's projecting that on her boyfriend. If she knows, she probably has known for a while that there aren't really intelligent consequences to yelling at someone who, let's say, he doesn't deserve it. But it can be hard to stop, right? But if she's able to understand that intellectually and also feel that a part of that is about her own kind of emotional baggage, which we all have, it's going to be more likely that she has the motivation and understanding to change her gears, right? Similarly, someone who's very emotional, someone who's clinging to other people, they just feel the need, they always have to be with people and in relationships, and they kind of come on too strong. I think we've all, met people who can kind of have those kinds of qualities. They might understand how they feel, they might not be aware of how other people perceive it, or they would maybe stop, right? So helping clients understand, the emotional element of it, how do you feel, why do you feel that way, also what are you doing, and how is that perceived, and are those consequences that you want? Is this the most logical way for you to kind of get your needs met? So those two things together are going to build a strong foundation for really positive client insights that will lead to really good kind of action and behavioral changes. So what's so important about the insight stage is this is where you're finally getting to those pieces that need to shift. And I really liked this kind of quote from the text that says that going beyond exploration to insight and understanding requires a deep sense of empathy and belief in our clients. What does that mean? Why is that? when you get to kind of the things and that people do that really aren't getting them what they want, you're a lot of times dealing with different personal issues, different baggage issues. In the book, they kind of talk about these different theories, psychodynamic, psychoanalytic, attachment, but all of them kind of share this theme of someone who's gone through their life and gotten certain messages and gotten kind of mixed up, and then maybe the way that they approach the world is kind of tinted by that baggage. So you're going into some deep territory here, right? So it's just important to know that this requires a lot of sensitivity, a lot of exploration, a lot of awareness, because sometimes getting people to change behaviors they've had for many years can be really tough stuff. So how do we start to facilitate this client insight making? Well, helpers are generally building hunches about what might be going on with clients during time spent in the exploration stage. I know several of you in your assignments, you're starting to put together what could be the deeper picture here? And you don't want to start going at that in the exploration stage, but if you've really explored with a client, you might have some different ideas going on, different things that you're saying that you think this could be something for us to touch on when we're ready, when the client is ready to be challenged. So here are some questions that can be useful to assess those dynamics related to building insight with clients. First, is the client showing any contradictions in how they express their feelings, describe their actions or thoughts? An example, do they say one thing and do another? And, why might that be based on the information we have about them? What is specifically causing the client's behavior at this time? Does anything else they've shared, come to mind as a possible reason? Maybe they notice that they tend to flip out around a certain type of person, and a person like that has come into their life, but they haven't really put together the pieces of, oh, well, this person reminds me of my uncle who was abusive to me as a child. Or there are examples of things that are not so traumatic, but I'm a counselor and that's what my brain goes to. But yeah, why are there any specific clues of why this behavior, why right now? What's keeping the client from changing right now? Generally, people struggle to change, but there are reasons. Are they ready? Are they not aware? Are they too stressed out in life that the thought of them making changes right now seems like too much, there's too much going on? That's a really helpful question. And then, what do I know about the client's personal defenses or resistance? Or, are there any transference issues that come up? But I would particularly pay attention to defenses or resistance. We've talked about defense mechanisms are there for a reason. So what are their defense mechanisms, and do I have a clue about why those are there for them? And then lastly, how am I the helper feeling in the therapeutic relationship? I think that's a very valuable question because, again, it lets you know if you're feeling certain way towards the client. Obviously, you should be showing them unconditional positive regard, but are they a little too clingy? Do they tend to go on and talk too much? Client should be talking, but are they almost not responding to you? Are there any little ways that you feel kind of like that you have to work through to kind of really be there for the client? If you're feeling that way about that person, other people are probably feeling that way about that person. We're not talking yet about how to bring that kind of stuff up with clients because there's a particular way to do that that is respectful. But these are all really helpful questions to start to think about what could be the places we want to explore together for insight. Goals of the insight stage. We want to challenge the client to foster self-awareness. This is a stage where we really start to challenge people in a caring but well-rationalized way. We're going to get to those skills next week because I think that they are obviously very delicate but also very powerful. General skills for facilitating insight. We'll start to talk about those today, the kinds of questions that you ask, how you phrase them. There are some similarities with skills from the exploration stage, however. And the use of immediacy. Again, we'll talk about that more next week, but immediacy is using how you're feeling and reacting and thinking about the client in the moment, in the session, immediate. So we can imagine we see that there's a bit more of a challenging flavor to this stage, right? So that is why the success of the interventions and goals of the insight stage are so dependent upon how thoroughly you have explored things with this client during the exploration stage and the quality of the therapeutic alliance. For example, if someone comes to me that I don't really know that well and I don't really trust their intentions, and if they tell me something that I need to change about myself or something that is getting in my way, I'm not going to receive that well. I'm going to think they're up in my business and need to scoot out. However, if it's someone that I know cares about me, understands me, has taken the time to really get to know me, I'm going to trust that they have good intentions and that the feedback they're giving me could actually be really valuable and meant for my own good. So that's kind of the basis of the insight stage. Let's start to look at just a few skills. All right, so first, what are the building blocks for facilitating insight? The first is empathic curiosity. Let's break that down. What does it mean to be empathic? It means to connect, to care for, to be, comfortable with some of those hard feelings, and an interest in that person who's feeling them, and curiosity, wanting to know more. 2, a belief that facilitating a client's own insight will serve them best. You aren't imposing your own thoughts. You might share some of your thoughts and feelings, but you're not imposing them. It's up to them to say whether or not it's a fit. 3, a willingness to tentatively share your own insight in a non-authoritative manner. This is kind of a stage where helpers may feel particularly vulnerable because they're really giving some of their own interpretations. But those interpretations are going to be really valuable to your clients, and they are done in, again, a non-judgmental, non-authoritative manner. And 4, a connection with your clients, an ability to kind of read their reactions in this process, because again, this is going to maybe hit a little close to home at certain points, so that connection and understanding and watching your clients is key. So let's look at these skills in context by using the same helper and therapist that we discussed earlier, Roger and Mark. So Roger the helper might say, "We've spent a lot of time discussing your feelings of depression and retirement, as well as the tension you are feeling between you and your husband, Mark. I'm wondering, do you feel like there is any connection there?" Mark might say, "The more we talk about it, I kind of do. I'm obviously not feeling the same way about myself that I did when I was managing my company. I wouldn't be surprised if David felt the same way." Roger might say, "Tell me more about that." Mark might say, "He has always told me that he was attracted to my confidence. In my day, it was really challenging to feel confident as a gay man. I was lucky to have a supportive family, and I was confident. I haven't been confident or happy for a while. He probably feels unsure about where I am. I'm not acting like the man he fell in love with." So if we notice, this is an open question for insight, and this is a probe for insight. Also notice that Roger was very empathetic in how he worded each of these things. He was very gentle, and he provided a platform for Mark to really see deeper connections in the things. The next skill that we have are interpretations. Interpretations involve the helper sharing their educated hunches about the dynamics that the client has not overtly stated or recognized. What do we mean by this? These could include a couple different things. One is maybe you make a connection between two statements or events that could seem isolated so far according to the client. An example of this, maybe the client is talking about being depressed and has vaguely mentioned that their sister has moved away. So the connection there could be, could your current depression be related to the fact that your sister has moved away? Another one is when you see themes or patterns in the client's behavior and sort of point it out and give a possible reason. One example would be, I've noticed that you never stay in a relationship for longer than a year. Could you have a fear of someone really getting to know you? Another example could be maybe you kind of see the defense mechanisms, the resistance that your client tends to have and how they tend to show up, and you point that out. I'm wondering if you unconsciously expect every woman to abandon you like your mother did. So maybe you see those defense mechanisms show up in a certain pattern. They tend to have the same response to women, and you can connect that to things they've said about their mother in the past. Another one is just offering a new explanation or reframe. So in this example, a client has really low self-esteem and they tend to discuss themselves as a failure, but they've also talked about some past dynamics that could be at play. So as the helper, you might say, you've told me that you think that you're a failure, but it sounds like to me that your stepdad told you you were wrong and failing so often that you began to believe it as a fact of who you were. So as you can see, these can be pretty powerful things to share, and there are different sources of data for developing these interpretations. One is, what has the client told you? What are the things that clients spend most of their time talking about, and what do they tend to not talk about? What clients say a lot and what clients refuse to say can be equally important. Next, what about their past might be in play in here? Are there significant experiences that they've discussed or referenced? Are there themes or connections to those events with things that could be happening now? How do they describe their interactions with others? Are there any interpersonal patterns that you see? Are they aware of how they contribute to their interactions? For example, do they tend to be very defensive in their relationships and then blame everybody else? Next, kind of related, what are the defense mechanisms? Do they understand the role of this mechanism plays in their life? And also, why this defense mechanism? Are they avoidant? If so, why avoidance? Do they tend to project? If so, why do they tend to project? Next can be related to life stage. It can be a good source of data for an interpretation to really ask, what stage of life are they in? What are common challenges at different life stages? Do they feel they've mastered developmental hurdles? Again, this can relate to some developmental language often found in psychology courses, but we can all kind of understand that when we're teenagers, we have to kind of figure out who we are. When we get to midlife, it's about, have I succeeded? Do I have the career? When you're older, it's how do I feel about my life in general? That's a very brief overview, but developmental stages can say a lot. Then next, are there any just existential or spiritual issues here? For them, what is the meaning of life? Do they feel like they have a purpose in life? How do they approach losses? How do they feel about death? And so those are different sources. But when it comes to interpretations, here are a few points to note. I will say read carefully in the text about this section, as with all the sections, but here are some highlights. First, interpretation should obviously be made very carefully, very thoughtfully, and rarely. You should really be using your knowledge of the client here, and it should be used with a lot of intention and rationality. Interpretations can be very powerful and useful. These can be a way to shake up blocked thinking that a client might be experiencing. So again, we want to use them carefully because they can be so powerful, and the more accurate, the more powerful they're going to be for the client. They should be shared with a spirit of empathy and kindness. Obviously not a spirit of I told you so, or listen to me, this is who you are and how you think. It should be offered very kindly and from a place of understanding. And most importantly, they should be shared tentatively. You should share them with confidence of knowledge of your client and a desire to help, but also understanding you could be wrong. Clients get to choose if they are a fit. But even if you offer an interpretation that isn't totally accurate, it could still provide clients a new way to look at their situation and provide them a new road for understanding. The last skill we're going to talk about is disclosures of insight. Much like other types of disclosures, this skill involves sharing insight that you have gained as a helper in a comparable life situation of your own. Now, in sharing personal insights that you've had, you should share with the instinct that the client is going to benefit from hearing about it. Obviously, if it's not something you think will help them, you shouldn't share. Disclosing insight can help normalize the fact that we can all get stuck in our own understanding of our lives. Sometimes we just don't know how to think about a situation in a new way, and hearing about how someone else responded to that situation or thought about it can be helpful. And finally, disclosures of insight from a helper can be particularly useful in cases where the client could feel defensive if challenged directly. Let's look at examples of this. First, kind of generally, when sharing an insight, you've gone through a similar situation. So in this example, let's look at Tracy. So Tracy has been speaking to her supervisor about losing her mother and has been struggling to engage with the rest of her life. Her supervisor, Sharon, suspects that Tracy may be struggling with no longer having any older adult family members to guide her based on different things that Tracy has said. Sharon can relate to this feeling and chooses to disclose her own insight in the hopes that Tracy might connect to it and find some insight about her own situation. Sharon shares, when my mom died, I was really lost for a long time. It took me a while to come to terms with the fact that I didn't have any parents anymore. I was the adult, the old one. I was in charge of me. Those thoughts made me feel vulnerable, but I had to learn to accept that life just works that way. Now imagine how different that probably feels to Tracy than being told, hey, you just have to get over it, this is a part of life. This is a powerful insight that shares Sharon's own struggles and vulnerabilities with going through something similar. Let's look at one more example. So this is an example of a case where a disclosure of insight can be really beneficial with clients that are kind of defensive and don't really want to be challenged directly, or maybe don't want to talk about certain things that could be useful to talk about. Here it is. So Steve has been meeting for anger management counseling with Ryan. Let's say that Ryan was referred by his boss for having several flare-ups of angry outbursts in the workplace. Ryan has shared some about being yelled at a lot by his dad as a child, but tries to avoid discussing his emotions about it. Similarly, he gets testy when Steve tries to challenge his habits of exploding on others. Steve decides that Ryan might benefit from hearing about his own experiences. So Steve might share, "You know, Ryan, I've mentioned to you before that I had some experience with angry outbursts when I was younger. I kept yelling at my wife and pushing her away. I knew that it would hurt her, but I couldn't stop myself. Eventually the marriage ended, and I finally went to counseling about it. I realized that, as a man, I didn't know how to express my feelings, but through anger. Additionally, my mom bullied me a lot as a kid and was pretty angry herself. I saw her patterns of behavior, but more importantly, I felt stuffed up and like I didn't matter, so I would explode. I had to learn that I mattered and to be patient with myself. I wonder if you can relate to anything I'm sharing." Now notice, if Steve were to share this with Ryan, Steve is being vulnerable. He's not judging Ryan for his behaviors, but he is pointing out that they aren't helpful because it wasn't helpful when he had angry outbursts. He's also showing him empathy, trying to understand why Ryan might be doing what he's doing. He's trying to open the door so that Ryan can begin to explore his own feelings and acknowledge that he's angry for a reason and he needs to find another way to show it, but he needs that kernel of understanding first. So, insight. It's about helping clients make sense of their experiences. It's a mixture of pulling out thoughts and feelings, and it works well when you have a strong relationship with your client. I'm going to look forward to going over more skills with you next week. Good luck and read closely. Thanks, guys.